Much of my work is of landscapes for books, magazines, calendars and CD covers. A landscape photograph succeeds or fails by the prevailing weather, but having arrived at the right place, at the right time, and pointed the camera in the right direction, there are several controls on OM-D and PEN cameras that help the technical side of photography. They are metering modes, exposure compensation, and image stabilizer. I spot meter with an electronic finder that gives a preview with my settings, which an optical finder cannot do. I underexpose by minus 0.3 EV using exposure compensation to avoid unintentional burnt-out highlights in clouds, useful when working at speed under fast-changing light. For flexibility and freedom of movement, spot metering is best accomplished hand-holding the camera, aided by the image stabilizer set to auto. Unless working under the most abysmal conditions, the photographer will probably be using a shutter speed fast enough to handhold at f8 or 11 at 200 ISO, which a reasonably fit person should be able to handle. With the exception of compact cameras and smartphones, depth of field is greater with Micro Four Thirds than many other digital formats, even at wide aperture. You may argue that a powerful telephoto demands a tripod, but the traditional rule still counts today by using a shutter speed equal to or faster than the equivalent film focal length of the lens. There are various ways to spot meter. I prefer to set the focusing to S-AF, not C-AF, which will continue to alter focusing and exposure the moment the camera is moved. Half depressing the shutter button locks both focusing and exposure, so detach autofocus first if not required. Use electronic finder to locate the correct exposure point. Half depress shutter button to lock, recompose if necessary and take picture. I tend to select a point that underexposes the image slightly, as restoring shadows in Adobe Lightroom is easier than highlights, but be careful about noise creeping into the dark areas of the image. It takes a bit of practice, but as my music teacher said to me, practice makes perfect. I failed in music, but succeeded with the same advice in photography. Much of my work is accomplished with a mid-range zoom, around 4 to 5 times magnification. Extreme wide angles have become fashionable, even a cliché like misty water, but should be used with caution. They are wonderful for dramatic foregrounds, but mountains in the background look like molehills. The celebrated mountain photographer of the 1960s, W.A. Poucher, who published many books, preferred a 90mm telephoto film lens. His work may be unfashionable today, but he maintained that a mountain photograph should be appreciated as such by his audience. I save to RAW and execute post-production in Lightroom. Artistically, I often change my mind. Therefore, I will not set the camera or use anything from which I cannot backtrack. Lightroom allows me to do that, even 6 months later. After all, a landscape might be static, but my thinking is always on the move. Lightroom also has a wonderful cataloguing system, which works best if you give each photograph a unique name. This is not so time-consuming if you use Olympus Viewer. It does a fantastic job, and of course, it's free. Although I'm weighed down by the bus pass, I am not weighed down by unnecessary gear on a long walk that in mileage reaches double figures. Less is more concentrates the mind, and so does a prime lens. I present talks and have been told that I am not a real photographer. My pictures were great, but I had taken them incorrectly by renouncing extra gear. Perhaps my technique requires a health warning, but rather than join that queue and execute my photography like everyone else, I have developed my own style that suits me and possibly no one else. If, on the other hand, there is a nugget of information here that finds a response, then add it to your own style without being a clone to me or anyone else.